Yeah, so as he said, we're in Judges 9, and we just heard about Gideon in Judges 8 from Croc and Aaron. Christian Croc, not Sierra. We were at, I play in a basketball league on Fridays, and we were at, and Croc's on my team, and his mom's been coming out to the past couple games, and Megan was sitting beside her, and she was talking, and she said something about, she said, "Oh, good shot, Croc," or "Let's go, Croc." And her mom looked over at her like, "What are you talking about? I'm Croc." And then it was kind of awkward there for a minute because she had to describe this. Like, no, we call him all Croc at church, and we don't call him Christian. And he's like, "Oh, okay." So in Judges 9, we have this whole passage is in regards to the rise of Abimelech. And it's a really long chapter. It's 57 verses. And we're going to go through it and pick out a couple things from it. But as background, and I think J.D. touched on this a little bit, and he mentioned how Gideon had all these sons that he had. So if you go to Judges 8 and verse 29, it says, "And Jerubbabel the son of Joash went and dwelt in his own house, and Gideon had 70 sons of his body begotten, for he had many wives." So that's 70, which is 70. "And his concubine that was in Shechem, she also bare him a son, whose name he called Abimelech." So there's where Abimelech comes from. He comes from Gideon's concubine in Shechem. And you get over to verse 1 and 2 of Judges 9, you see Abimelech as he's giving his pitch to these people and trying to become their king. And he says in verse 1, "And Abimelech the son of Jerubbabel went to Shechem unto his mother's brethren, and communed with them and with all the family of the house of his mother's father, saying, Speak, I pray you, in the ears of all the men of Shechem, whether is better for you, either that all of the sons of Jerubbabel, which are 70 persons, reign over you, or that one reign over you. Remember also that I am your bone and your flesh." So in verse 1, it's fast forwarded a little bit, and now Abimelech is wanting to become king, and like a lot of these old ancient Eastern countries, he sees his brothers as threats because there are other people who might think that they're the heir to the throne. So Abimelech tries to sell his family in Shechem on why they should be helping him, and in doing so, he commits a couple of logical fallacies, which I think will help us a little bit. And the first one is a fallacy called a false dichotomy. And he says in verse 2, he says, "Is it better that all should reign or that one should reign?" And the implication is obviously that the one should be Abimelech because he said, "I'm your bone and your flesh." But why are those the only two options? Why is it all 70 or Abimelech? What about one of the other 70, or what about none of the other 70? Why is it always just these two options that he's giving them? And Abimelech uses this false dichotomy to kind of pigeonhole his family into thinking, well, I don't want 70 people to reign over me. That could be confusing. That could be a lot of stuff going on. I don't know which one I would have to listen to. So I guess if that's the only alternative, I guess we'll pick you, Abimelech. And because of their lack of alternative options, the people of Shechem fall prey to Abimelech's false dichotomy. And in the Bible, there are several examples where some people try to use this same fallacy to trick up Christians. And go to Romans 6. And you'll see every time these come up that the either Paul or Jesus or whoever encounters it, they use the same type of thinking. So in Romans 6, verse 15, it says, "What then? Shall we sin because we are not under the law, but under grace? God forbid." In this passage, and that same reference is mentioned elsewhere in the Bible too, similar concept. But basically, Paul is parroting an argument that is effectively saying, are we bound by laws or are we bound by grace? Do we have freedom or are we restrained? And he's saying, the people are saying, these are the two options, grace or law, freedom or restraint. Which one is it? And if we're bound by laws, then this whole grace thing that Paul's been going on about doesn't really matter. And if we're bound by grace, then the whole commandment thing doesn't matter. So which one is it? But Paul shuts down that dichotomy, And he says that those aren't the only two options. There's another scenario that you're not mentioning. It's not an either-or scenario. And that comes in the next verse. It says in verse 16, "Know ye not that to whom ye yield yourselves servants to obey, his servants ye are to whom you obey, whether of sin unto death or of obedience unto righteousness? But God be thanked that ye were the servants of sin, but ye have obeyed from the heart that form of doctrine which was delivered you. Being then made free from sin, ye became the servants of righteousness." So Paul's point isn't, he's saying it's not about are you under grace and you can do whatever, and it's not about you're under law, grace doesn't matter. Paul's saying that the point is you're not free to sin, but instead that you're free from sin, right? It's not grace or freedom, it's freedom through grace. And that freedom comes with responsibilities, obviously. Jesus was full of grace, but he didn't use that grace to do whatever he wanted to do, whatever Jesus himself wanted to do. He used that grace to do whatever God wanted him to do. And there's the famous passage when he's in the Garden of Gethsemane and he says, "Remove this cup from me, nevertheless not my will, but thine be done," where Jesus is saying, it's not about what I want to do. I have the freedom to do what you want me to do. And Jesus in the flesh didn't want to die on the cross, but he did it because it's what God wanted. And that's this dichotomy between freedom and grace that Paul is saying. It's not either or, it's both of them. And then go to 1 Corinthians 3. 1 Corinthians 3, verse 4, you see another, people have mentioned to Paul another false dichotomy they've given him, and it says in verse 4, "For while one saith, I am of Paul, and another, I am of Apollo, are ye not carnal?" So the Corinthians here are effectively saying, you're either of Paul or you're of Apollo. Which one is it? Because it can't be both. You're either following Paul or you're following Apollo. And again, Paul comes in verse 5 through 7, and he kind of shuts this down. He says, "Who then is Paul, and who is Apollos, but ministers by whom ye believed, even as the Lord gave to every man? I have planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the increase. So then neither is he that planteth anything, neither he that watereth, but God that giveth the increase." So Paul's kind of saying, no, it's not either or. Following Apollo isn't rejecting Paul, and following Paul isn't rejecting Apollo. Rather, that following after either of them is following after God, because they're both following God. And Jesus, if you go to Mark 12, Jesus himself was presented with the same type of false dichotomies, and again, several times, and the Pharisees or the Sadducees would try to trick him up. And in Mark 12, verses 13 through 17, you have the Pharisees trying to ask him this trick question. And verse 13 says, "And they send unto him certain of the Pharisees and of the Herodians to catch him in his words. And when they were come, they say unto him, Master, we know that thou art true, and carest for no man, for thou regardest not the person of men, but teachest the way of God in truth. Is it lawful to give tribute to Caesar or not? Shall we give or shall we not give?" So they're saying, is it lawful to give taxes to Caesar, or is it unlawful to give taxes to Caesar? Should we give or should we not give? And again, Jesus kind of shuts that down. He says neither. There's a third option. And you look at verse 17, it says, "Render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God." So don't go into that questioning that that people are asking you, but look and see there's another option. And then in verse 18, the Sadducees try to ask him a trick question again, or two, as well as the Pharisees. And it says in 18, "Then come unto him the Sadducees, which say, There is no resurrection. And they asked him, saying, Master, Moses wrote unto us, if a man's brother die and leave his wife behind, and leave no children, that his brother should take his wife and raise up seed unto his brother. Now there were 7 brethren, and the first took a wife, and dying left no seed. And the second took her and died, neither left he any seed. And the third likewise. And the 7 had her and left no seed. Last of all, the woman died also. In the resurrection, therefore, when they shall rise, whose wife shall she be of them? For the 7 had her to wife." So they're pretty much saying, which wife is which wife is the brothers? Which brother's wife will she be? Think that through. Is she going to be brother 1's wife? Is she brother 2's wife? Is she brother 3's wife? Is she brother 4? And they're only giving these limited options. But then Jesus comes in verse 25 and says there's another option that you're not thinking of. "For when they shall rise from the dead, they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are as the angels which are in heaven. So again, Jesus comes in and says, no, you're not thinking about this properly. There's a third option. And people are trying to trick him up. People are trying to trick Paul up. People are trying to trick these Christians up into thinking that, into kind of pigeonholing them into this idea. And you see this now as Christians too. You have someone come up to you and say, do you believe in science or the Bible? As if those are the only two options. You have science here and you have the Bible here, and you can't have both, right? Paul or Apollos, science or the Bible. And of course, you look at it the same way that that Paul looked at it or Jesus looked at it, and you say, no, there's a third option. Step back and say, I can believe both. You can believe science and you can believe the Bible, right? Or someone might say, I couldn't live by faith because I'm a rational person. Well, everything you do is living by faith. Even if you're a rational person, you have faith in something, because everyone has faith in something. So it's not just these two options, right? Or, more theologically, how could a loving God send someone to hell, right? But it's not just about those two things, because God is all loving, but God is also all just. And because he's just, he has to punish sin. And in punishing sin, he's loving those who follow him. Or do you think homosexuality is right, or do you hate homosexuals? And again, it's not either or. You can think something is wrong without hating the person doing it, but hating what they're doing. And you have to look through, if someone's giving you these ideas or these dichotomies, look through and say, is there another option? Because someone's trying to trap you, someone's trying to trick you up, just like they did Paul, just like they did Jesus. And just like Abimelech is doing in Judges 9. So go back to Judges 9. So Abimelech uses another fallacy here, and it's called an appeal to emotion. So he says at the end, at verse 2, remember also that I am your bone and your flesh. So instead of making any logical argument as to why Abimelech would be the best leader, his sole reasoning is pretty much, come on guys, I'm your brother, you know me, I'm your family, why don't you do this for you? And the people don't ask him, why will you be the best leader? And he just says, well, think of how horrible a non-relative would be. Or they ask him, but what are you going to do to protect us from invaders? And he just says, trust me, we're family. Or are we going to, how are you going to improve farming conditions, right? And he just says, hey, I'm one of you. Listen to me, I'm your family. But this is the same type of reasoning that gets people into bad situations all the time, and it's kind of the same thing of how peer pressure works. So if someone says, if you don't do this, then so-and-so won't like you, right? Or if you don't do what I want you to do, then I'm, not going to keep being friends with you. And they're trying to appeal to your emotion. They're trying to make you, they're trying to convince you to do something not based off of reason or logic, but based off of how you're going to feel after it, or how you want someone to feel about you. And ultimately, the reasoning has to come down to, should I or should I not do whatever it is? And what is supposed to guide that decision? Is it supposed to be your emotions, or is it supposed to be the Word of God? Are you making a decision because of how you feel in the moment, or because of the merits of the decision itself? And we should be careful when making decisions when someone is attempting to persuade you through an appeal to emotion, because if someone's giving you that sort of appeal, they're trying to get you to act based on your emotion. Because if you were acting based on thinking it through and based off of whether or not you should do it, you probably wouldn't be making the decision that they want you to make. So someone realizes that, and they're saying, well, if he's thinking this through, he's not going to do what I want him to do. So I'm going to try to I'm going to appeal to his emotion. I'm going to try to draw him in and make him make a decision based off of something that's not logical, based off of something he wouldn't otherwise do. And that's what Abimelech's doing here. And in verse 3, we see the people's response to this. It says, and his mother's brethren spake of him in the ears of all the men of Shechem all these words, and their hearts inclined to follow Abimelech. For they said, he is our brother. So the people of Shechem responded exactly like Abimelech desired them to respond. Abimelech's sole reasoning for listening, for wanting them to anoint him as their leader, was, I'm your brother. And then Shechem's sole reasoning here at the end of verse 3 is, he's our brother. So then we get to verse 4 through 6, and we see how Abimelech takes command. And it says, "And they gave him 70 pieces of silver out of the house of Baalberith, wherewith Abimelech hired vain and light persons which followed him. And he went unto his father's house at Ophrah, and slew his brethren the sons of Jerubbaal, being 70 persons, upon one stone. Notwithstanding yet Jotham, the youngest son of Jerubbaal, was left, for he hid himself. And all the men of Shechem gathered together, and all the house of Millo, and went and made Abimelech king by the plain of the pillar that was in Shechem." So we see here that now that they've made him Abimelech king, this is what he's doing. And what he does is he goes and he hires these vain and light persons. And in verse 4, it's what it says. And it says, and given the reasoning that Abimelech previously used, it's not surprising to see that the men who followed him are vain and light persons. And you see similar men pop up throughout the Bible and throughout the Old Testament. In Judges 11:3, it says, "Then Jephthah fled from his brethren and dwelt in the land of Tob, and there were gathered vain men to Jephthah, and went out with him." In 2 Chronicles 13:7, it says, "And there are gathered unto him vain men, the children of Belial, and have strengthened themselves against Rehoboam the son of Solomon." And then in Acts 17:5, there's a famous King James Bible passage where it says that these lewd fellows of the baser sort went after Paul, right? And it seems like there's always people around if you want help to cause trouble. It seems that more often than not, the person that is acting properly is doing so on his own, and the people acting improperly are doing so as a group. And if you think through, the Bible, I just had a couple things here. You get Noah, right? It was pretty much Noah and his family against everyone. That's the only people who God saved on the ark. It was him against them all. And if you go through in the New Testament, you have the Pharisees, who were acting as a group, as this religious leadership group, and they're going against this new upstart Christian rebellion, basically. And eventually, Jesus had his followers. He had his 12 disciples, and he had people who followed him, but not enough that kept him from getting crucified. There was more people who voted for him to be crucified than there were that weren't, or that didn't want him to. In the Old Testament, you have the Tower of Babel, which was a big group of people getting together to do something that they weren't supposed to do. And then most of the judges, when you go through this whole book, it's pretty much just there's Gideon that was doing right and a couple of hundred people, and then he killed 135,000 people who weren't doing right. Or you have Samson, and he's killing all the Philistines, or all these different situations. And then obviously the prophets as well, when you go through Isaiah and Jeremiah and Ezekiel and all of these, it's pretty much them going into this group of people that are acting wrong, and it's one person saying, you guys are all doing this wrong, I'm following after God, even though you guys aren't, and you should be. And if you want to find a bunch of people to do whatever it is that you want to do, I'm sure you can go on Facebook and there's a Facebook group for it. Or you can find something. And if you want to find something to do wrong, you can always find a group of people that want to join you in that. And as Christians, we should be thankful for the community of people that we have, whether it's your family or whether it's your friends or through the church or through our church itself, that you have a group of people that aren't trying to get you to do wrong, hopefully, that are trying to get you to do right, that are trying to get you to live spiritually, and you should try to focus on that group of people as opposed to finding these large groups of people that you can always find to do something wrong. So what did these people do? In verse 5, you see the climax of Abimelech's plan where he slew 70 of his brothers. So he killed all 70 of his brothers except one, except Jotham, as they see. So he killed 69 of his brothers. And he used 70 pieces of silver to hire these people to kill 70 of his brothers. So it's pretty much you get a silver for each person you kill. And it's kind of ironic here that just prior to this, Abimelech gave this whole pitch and this whole spiel about how family is important and you should help family. But then here we see how Abimelech really thinks about his family. I'm just going to kill them all. And it says that he killed them. In verse 5, it says he killed his brothers upon one stone. And go to 2 Kings 10. We're going to go right back to Judges, but in 2 Kings 10, a similar thing happens to Ahab's children. In 2 Kings 10:7, it says, "And it came to pass, when the letter came to him, that they took the king's sons and slew 70 persons, and put their heads in baskets, and sent them to Jezreel." And you notice the type of killing as it was there. They basically beheaded them. And then go to 1 Samuel, chapter 14. First Samuel 14:33 says, "Then they told Saul, saying, Behold, the people sin against the Lord, in that they eat with the blood. And he said, Ye have transgressed. Roll a great stone unto me this day. And Saul said, Disperse yourselves among the people, and say unto them, Bring me hither every man his ox, and every man his sheep, and slay them here, and eat. And sin not against the Lord in eating with the blood. And all the people brought every man his ox with him that night, and slew them there." So through these two passages, you kind of get an idea of what's going on. And the one you see Ahab's children, 70 children, they're beheaded. And then this one you see how people used big stones, right? People use throughout the Bible, they use these stones to sacrifice animals. And more likely than not, when it says they were killed on one stone, what that means is they were all executed on this stone. They didn't have wood tables much back then. If they did, there was something that you keep in a house or a palace. It's not something that you're going to execute someone on, so it's hard to make. They weren't going to do it on the ground because it's not going to work properly. So people would put things. If you've seen movies and stuff, it's the same type. Reading through this whole thing, I was just thinking of like some movies like Lord of the Rings or like something like that, because this whole passage is kind of like that. So he brings his 70 brothers up to this one stone, and one by one he puts them on the stone, cuts their head off. The next brother comes up, cuts their head off. That's pretty much how they operated back then, and you see that in these other passages. So this was something that everyone could see. It was a show of force that Abimelech was using to indicate who was in charge yet, or who is in charge now. And then in verse 6, they make Abimelech king. So here's the culmination of it. And it's kind of interesting because this is the first time that an Israelite has the title of king, which generally you think Saul was considered the first king. And kind of in a way he was, because Abimelech wasn't anointed by God, so he wasn't a king by God's anointing like Saul was a king by God's anointing. And in some ways he was more of like a stolen king or a leader of a rebellion, like how William Wallace was the leader of the Scottish Rebellion, or how Luke Skywalker was the leader of the Galactic Rebellion in a way. But he wasn't a king, so regardless, he still had control and influence over people. Then we get to verses 7 through 21, where this is a prophecy by Jotham, who was the one son that was able to escape and not be killed by Abimelech. And I don't know, we might be talking about this in a different time, so I'm kind of skipping over this prophecy here and going to the end of it. So this paragraph kind of describes how Jotham escapes and goes on to warn of Abimelech's coming destruction. But just look at the end of it in verses 19 through 20. This is Jotham talking to Abimelech. He says, If ye then have dealt truly and sincerely with Jerubbabel and with his house this day, then rejoice ye in Abimelech, and let him also rejoice in you. But if not, let fire come out from Abimelech and devour the men of Shechem and the house of Millo, and let fire come out from the men of Shechem and from the house of Millo and devour Abimelech. So Jotham's pretty much saying, hey, if you acquired this whole king thing through righteousness and properly, then more power to you. Have a great day. Go on and enjoy it, right? But if not, and if you took it by treason, if you took it improperly, then Abimelech, you're going to destroy Shechem and Millo, and then Shechem and Millo, you're going to destroy Abimelech. So there's going to be this mutual destruction with everybody involved. And we'll see that come to pass at the very end of the chapter. But then in verses 22 through 25, so going forward, we see that Shechem is starting to turn on Abimelech, and they're starting to mount this rebellion. When Abimelech had reigned 3 years over Israel, then God sent an evil spirit between Abimelech and the men of Shechem, and the men of Shechem dealt treacherously with Abimelech, that the cruelty done to the 70 sons of Jerubbabel might come, and their blood be laid upon Abimelech their brother, which slew them, and upon the men of Shechem, which aided him in the killing of his brethren. And the men of Shechem set liers in wait for him in the top of the mountains, and they robbed all that came along that way by them. And it was told Abimelech. So in verse 22, it says that Abimelech reigned 3 years, which is the shortest reign of any of these judges that we come upon. It didn't take long for people to get fed up with him. And then in verse 23, we see that God had sent this evil spirit between Abimelech and the people of Shechem. So just taking a quick detour on that, there's two interpretations of this that it could be. The first is that the evil spirit is not a spiritual being, but rather it's a metaphor to refer to a human attitude. So that is, God sent a spirit of animosity between Abimelech and between Shechem. And this sort of metaphor is used throughout the Bible. In 1 Corinthians 4:21, it says, "What will ye? Shall I come unto you with a rod or in love, and in the spirit of meekness?" So it's talking about you have the spirit of meekness. So is this evil spirit a spirit of an animosity between them, or is it an actual being? And obviously the second way you could interpret this is that this was an evil spirit being used by God. And just quickly going off on that, if it is the latter, if it is an evil spirit being, that doesn't mean that God is the commander-in-chief of all evil spirits, that God is the leader of all evil. Rather, usually in the Bible, when God sends an evil spirit, it is after the recipient of the spirit has manifested an intent to reject God. And obviously here in Abimelech and Shechem, they both have manifested an intent to reject God. And this happens to King Saul multiple times. In 1 Samuel 16:14, it says, "But the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, and an evil spirit from the Lord troubled him." But this is in chapter 16 of 1 Samuel, and this was in response to Saul's disobedience of God. So in 1 Samuel 13, he first sins against God when he didn't wait for Samuel to arrive before he made this sacrifice. God told him to wait on Samuel. He got tired of waiting, sacrificed instead. Then Samuel shows up right after that, of course. And then in 1 Samuel 15, Saul again didn't totally destroy the Amalekites when God told him, you need to destroy this. And he saved he saved the king, I think, and he saved some of like the best animals. And in response to that, this evil spirit from the Lord came and troubled him. And a similar thing happened to King Ahab in 1 Kings 22, where he's looking for this prophecy that he wants to hear, and he's having all these people come in and say, "Hey, tell me what's going to happen if I go to this battle." And they all say, "Oh, you're going to win. It's going to be great." And then one of the prophets comes along and says, "No, you're going to die, and it's not going to work out right." But he keeps trying to get these people to tell him what he wants to hear, and he keeps rejecting what God's telling him. And then at the end, in verse 23 of 1 Kings 22, it says, "Now therefore, behold, the Lord hath put a lying spirit in the mouths of all these prophets, and the Lord has spoken evil concerning thee." But this came after Ahab was seeking to hear what Ahab wanted to hear, as opposed to Ahab seeking what God wanted him to hear. So typically throughout the Bible, if these evil spirits come, it's in response to someone already having rejected God, and God is either sending an evil spirit or God is allowing an evil spirit to be put on someone or between someone or causing these problems. And regardless of what the reasoning is, we know from James 1:13 that God does not tempt anyone to sin. James 1:13 says, "Let no man say when he is tempted, I am tempted of God, for God cannot be tempted with evil, neither tempteth he any man." So this is an area where we know what God isn't doing, but sometimes it's still not clear what God is doing. But the answer isn't to blame God for temptation or sin, but instead to realize that there's a purpose for whatever's going on. And like in Abimelech's case, the purpose was the consequence of past wrong choices. And you see that in the very next word of the very next verse, it says that. So this evil spirit comes between Shechem and Abimelech, and the men of Shechem dealt treacherously with Abimelech, that the cruelty done to the 70 sons of Zerubbabel might come. So it says here exactly why that spirit was come, and it was come so that the cruelty that Abimelech did would be repaid unto him. And it was in direct response to the actions that he had made. And in verse 25, the people of Shechem, the way that this animosity is manifesting itself in a way is they've put these robbers along the way, that anyone that was coming into Shechem, these people are going to jump out and they're going to rob them, kind of like the Good Samaritan story where the guy's walking down the road and these robbers come out and beat him and take his stuff. So they have these people set up, and that gets Abimelech's attention at the end of verse 25. It was told Abimelech, and Abimelech's thinking, I don't want my town to be known as this place where people aren't going to come in and aren't going to trade goods with me or whatever, because people are going to come and rob them, and that's what gets his attention. So then we get to verses 26 through 29, where you're introduced to this new character, and his name's Gaul, and it says in verse 26, "And Gaul the son of Ebed came with his brethren, and went over to Shechem. And the men of Shechem put their confidence in him. And they went out into the fields, and gathered their vineyards, and trode the grapes, and made merry, and went into the house of their God, and did eat and drink, and cursed Abimelech. And Gaal the son of Ebed said, Who is Abimelech, and who is Shechem, that we should serve him? Is not he the son of Jerubbaal, and Zebul his officer? Serve the men of Hamor, the father of Shechem, for why should we serve him? And would to God this people were under my hand, then I would remove Abimelech. And he said to Abimelech, Increase thine army and come out. So you have this person, Gaal the son of Ebed, and nothing more is known of this person, but apparently he had at least some measure of wealth and some measure of popularity, because he was able to convince all these people of Shechem to get on his side and to convince them that he would be a better king than Abimelech. And one interesting thing here is in verse 26, it says he went over to Shechem, and in the last verse, in verse 25, Shechem had made their city into one that ambushed and robbed people, made it into like a crime-ridden town. And we see that evil begets evil. It's almost like God was saying, oh, you wanted crime and lawlessness. Well, fine, I'll bring you someone that you'll love. He'll fit right in with you guys. This is what you wanted, so here he is. And I was reading the story last week. I'm not being political, but it reminds me of some of the cities now in the United States. And there's this describing Seattle. A Wall Street Journal article from last month says, Seattle's soft on criminals policy predates 2020, but the city council has voted 2 years in a row to cut police funding. Since January 1st, 2020, some 357 cops have retired or quit. It's nearly impossible to recruit police officers to work in a city infamous for its hostility to the police. So where does that lead? And this is what reminded me of this, because I just read an article from last week where Amazon announced that it's relocating 1,800 of its employees from its downtown headquarters. And a Business Insider article stated that an Amazon spokesperson told them, we are hopeful that conditions will improve, and that we will be able to bring employees back to this location when it's safe to do so, because there's been so much crime in downtown Seattle. And then you can look it up, and it's all over Wall Street Journal, Business Insider, whatever, wherever you want to read it. And it says dozens of other businesses have done same things, and even McDonald's has closed down all its downtown Seattle restaurants because no one wants to be down there anymore because there's so much crime going on. And it kind of reminded me of this, is because these people set up this whole crime thing. They wanted this to be a place where we're going to rob all the people that come to us, and then they get people that are going to act like that. So sometimes when you ask for something, you actually get it. And here, Shechem desired to turn their city into a wretched hive of scum and villainy. And then, whoops, here comes Gaal to live up to that standard. So Gaal starts dissing Abimelech, and he's like, who is this guy? And it's ironic when you compare Gaal's mockery here with what we talked about in verse 2. And in verse 2, what was the only reasoning that Abimelech gave for why he should rule over everyone? Because he was their brother. So now 3 years later, people are starting to think, hey, who is this guy? Why is he in charge? Who put this person in charge? Who did this? What did Abimelech do to deserve this position? Why is he our king, right? And Gaal and Shechem have come to realize that maybe Abimelech wasn't the right man for this job after all, shockingly. The guy who kills all his brothers to get in charge. Maybe you don't want him to be your king. So then, verses 30 through 33, you have Abimelech being warned of this guy. And it says, and when Zebul, the ruler of the city, heard the words of Gaal, the son of Ebed, his anger was kindled. And we know from the previous passage, Zebul is one of Abimelech's officers. And he sent messengers unto Abimelech privily, saying, Behold, Gaal the son of Ebed and his brethren be come to Shechem, and behold, they fortify the city against thee. Now therefore, up by night, thou and the people that is with thee, and lie in wait in the field. And it shall be that in the morning, as soon as the sun is up, thou shalt rise early and set upon the city. And behold, when he and the people that is with him come out against thee, then mayest thou do to them as thou shalt find occasion. So he warns Abimelech of Gaal and Shechem and how these people are trying to build up against him. And he tells them, hey, they're going to be waiting out an ambush for you, so you should wait out an ambush for them for when they come out against you. You know, you think ambush is your ally, you know, you should turn that against them. So then in verses 34, the whole rest of this chapter is like, it's pretty much just talking about this battle and what happens after this. It's very historical, we're going to go through, but in verses 34 through 45, you have the battle of Abimelech against Gaal. And verse 34 says, And Abimelech rose up, and all the people that were with him by night, and they laid wait against Shechem in 4 companies. And Gaal the son of Ebed went out and stood in the entering of the gate of the city, and Abimelech rose up, and the people that were with him from lying in wait. And when Gaal saw the people, he said to Zebul, Behold, there come people down from the top of the mountains. And Zebul said unto him, Thou seest the shadow of the mountains as if they were men. So Zebul says, You're seeing things. You need to get your glasses checked. And Gaal's like, No, there's people coming down from the mountain. And Gaal spake again and said, See, there come people down by the middle of the land, and another company come along by the plain of Meononim. Then said Zebul unto him, Where is now thy mouth, wherewith thou saidst, Who is Abimelech, that we should serve him? Is not this the people that thou hast despised? Go out, I pray, now, and fight with them. So he's kind of saying, put your money where your mouth is, Gaal. You've been talking all this trash about Abimelech. You said you wanted to destroy him. You said, why is he even king? Why is he even doing this? And now here he is in front of you, and now you don't want to say anything against him. So he's kind of saying, you're all bark and no bite. Go out and fight him. And Gaal went out, in verse 39, before the men of Shechem and fought with Abimelech. And Abimelech chased him, and he fled before him. And many were overthrown and wounded, even unto the entering of the gate. And Abimelech dwelt at Aramah, and Zebul thrust out Gaal and his brethren, that they should not dwell in Shechem. And it came to pass on the morrow that the people went out into the field, and they told Abimelech. And he took the people, and divided them into 3 companies, and laid wait in the field, and looked. And behold, the people were come forth out of the city, and he rose up against them, and smote them. And Abimelech and the company that was with him rushed forward, and stood in the entering of the gate of the city, and the 2 other companies ran upon all the people that were in the fields and slew them. And Abimelech fought against the city all that day, and he took the city, and slew the people that was therein, and beat down the city, and sowed it with salt. So Abimelech totally destroys all the people of Shechem. They wanted this guy to come in and rule over them, and he did. And then he fought against Abimelech, and all the people were punished because they had chosen to put their faith in this Gaal guy instead of just following after Abimelech, which not like he was a great guy either. But they kind of got what they wanted there, and it came back to bite them, and they were all destroyed. So then, in verse 46, there's this other group of people from Shechem that were kind of separated. They're off in this tower, and that's what this verses 46 through 49, it says, And when all the men of the tower of Shechem heard that the rest of their town got destroyed, that Abimelech went through and ransacked them all, they entered into an hold of the house of the god Berith. And it was told Abimelech that all the men of the tower of Shechem were gathered together. So they were all hiding up in this tower trying to, back in those times, and I've been to Ireland before, they have all these towers and stuff all over the place. Just randomly on like the side of a hill or on the side of a road or in a field, there's just these towers because that's how people protected themselves up until pretty recently. People would go up and hide in these towers, and it's kind of interesting. In these towers, they have staircases leading up to them, and the people in the staircases purposely made them wind a certain direction so that if you're coming up the tower, you had to fight with your left hand, but the people on the top can fight with their right hand. So they kind of made them like that, and they made the stairs different sizes. So instead of all being like the same size, they would make them different. So when people tried to run up, they'd trip. So that's how these towers were that people would make, and that was the main way they'd fortify themselves. So in verse 47, it was told to Abimelech that all the men of the tower of Shechem were gathered together. And Abimelech gat him up to Mount Zalmon, he and all the people that were with him. And Abimelech took an axe in his hand and cut down a bow from the trees, and took it, and laid it on his shoulder, and said unto the people that were with him, What ye have seen me do, make haste and do as I have done. So he's basically telling everyone, cut down a Christmas tree and put it on your back and come with me. And all the people likewise cut down every man his bow, and followed Abimelech, and put them to the hold, to the tower there, and set the hold on fire upon them, so that all the men of the tower of Shechem died also, about 1,000 men and women. That's a pretty big tower. You got 1,000 people in it. But Abimelech pretty much cuts down this tree, puts it on his back, takes it over, tells everyone else to do it, and they plant it up against the side of the tower, kind of go around the whole thing, and it's like they're making this giant bonfire, and they light it on fire, kill the whole tower. So that's one way to take it down. And then in verse 50, Abimelech's not done yet, because now he's got this taste for this battle. He's gotten this taste for fighting people. He just wants to keep going. And in verse 50 through 55, he's like, well, I took down one tower. Let's just keep going. It says, Then went Abimelech to Thebez and encamped against Thebez and took it. But there is a strong tower within the city, another tower. And thither fled all the men and women, and all they of the city, and shut it to them, and gat them up to the top of the tower. So they all go in this tower again. It worked out well for the last people. We'll try it this time. And Abimelech came unto the tower, and fought against it, and went hard unto the doors of the tower to burn it with fire. So Abimelech's thinking, this worked last time. This is how we take down towers. Let's light this one on fire too. In verse 53, and a certain woman cast a piece of millstone upon Abimelech's head, and all to break his skull. So it didn't work out for Abimelech like he thought it would. And this person throws a stone out the top. This woman throws a stone out, hits him on the head. Verse 54, then he, Abimelech, called hastily unto the young man his armor-bearer, and said unto him, draw thy sword and slay me, that men say not of me, a woman slew him. And his young man thrust him through, and he died. And back in that culture, it was very important how you died. And you see Saul has a similar thing when Saul gets shot and he has with an arrow, and he has his sword bearer come and kill him. And it was a very important thing how you died, and it was seen then as an embarrassing thing if you were to be killed by a woman. So Abimelech says, I don't want people to know that I was killed by a woman, so he just has this young man kill him instead. And after that, in verse 55, and when the men of Israel saw that Abimelech was dead, they departed every man unto his own place. So it's kind of just like, all right, war's over, we're going back home. Like all these towers got destroyed, all this whole city's gone. Abimelech's dead now, all right, let's pack it up, let's go back to farming. And we get to the conclusion here in verses 56 and 57, and there's quick thoughts I want to get from this. Verse 56 says, thus God rendered the wickedness of Abimelech, which he did unto his father, in slaying his 70 brothers. And all the evil of the men of Shechem did God render upon their heads, and upon them came the curse of Jotham, the son of Jerubbabel. And when you look at this passage, it's kind of a weird passage because there's not even a judge mentioned in here. We're in the book of Judges, and most of these things have to do with a judge that comes along, whether it's Gideon or Deborah, or eventually we're going to get to other ones in the next chapter. It talks about Jair, and then Samson famously is coming up here in a little bit. So it's all these judges. And you have this random chapter here in chapter 9 where it just talks about this Abimelech person, and you could take this whole chapter out and nothing's going to change in the whole story of Judges that we're talking about. But I think two things kind of come across, and the main point of this whole thing is that you reap what you sow. And when you look at this whole passage, that's the whole concept. In verse 2, the people wanted Abimelech to be their king for no other reason than that he was their brother. Then in verse 28, you have Gaul and the people of Shechem looking around at each other, wondering who put Abimelech in charge and why he was there. In verse 4, Abimelech riled up the people of Shechem to join him in killing his brothers. Then in verse 26, Gaul riled up the people of Shechem against Abimelech. In verse 25, the people of Shechem turned their city into a den for villainy. And then later in verse 30, Shechem gets the villain they deserve in Gaul. And in verse 29, Gaul trash talks Abimelech and wants to start a fight with him. And in verse 45, Gaul got what he wanted, and Abimelech killed him and his entire army. So it's this back and forth. It's because you did this, this happened. Because you did this, this is what's going to happen. And then ultimately you get to these verses at the end that conclude the whole chapter. And in verse 5, Abimelech killed all of his brothers, except Jotham, had them all executed. Then in verse 19, Jotham prophesied that if what he did was wrong, then it was going to come back to bite him, and that there would be this mutual destruction. And then here at the end, God rendered unto Abimelech the consequence of his actions. And it specifically, it says, thus God rendered the wickedness of Abimelech. So because of the wickedness of Abimelech, this is what's going to happen to you. God caused him to die. God caused both these Shechem and Abimelech to die. And, this concept of reaping and sowing is obviously all throughout the Bible. That's where the phrase comes from. Proverbs 22:8 says, he that soweth iniquity shall reap vanity. Hosea 10:13 says, ye have plowed wickedness, ye have reaped iniquity. Job 4:8, even as I have seen, they that plow iniquity and sow wickedness reap the same. And then, probably the most prominent one, Galatians 6:7-8 says, be not deceived, God is not mocked. For whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. For he that soweth to his flesh shall of the flesh reap corruption. But he that soweth to the Spirit shall of the Spirit reap life everlasting. So Abimelech here was sowing to his flesh. He was sowing all these different seeds of murder and seeds of lawlessness and seeds of killing. And then eventually he reaped lawlessness, he reaped killing, he reaped all these things that he had been sowing for the past 3 years, ever since his start. And it's the same with us today. If you're sowing after whatever it is, you're going to find what you're looking for. If you're sowing after doing meth, you're going to reap not having teeth and having cuts all over your face from scratching yourself, right? If you're sowing after, I'm in law school right now, I'm going to law school, not because I enjoy law school necessarily, I'm going to law school so I can reap being a lawyer afterwards, right? Whatever you're going after, that's what you're going to reap from. And if you're sowing after something good, you're going to reap something good from that. And then lastly, in closing here quickly, we see this concept of leadership throughout here, and there's a dichotomy here, and you have Abimelech, who ruled by force, might makes right. He took down anyone who opposed him, and he killed 69 of his brothers to make himself king. So not exactly the leader that you would want to follow. And then on the other end of that spectrum, you have Jesus, right? And as we're talking about through John on next year, John 13, you have this example of a servant leader, right? This example of Jesus who washed his disciples' feet. He led by example. And in contrast to Abimelech, Jesus didn't sacrifice his brothers for himself, but he sacrificed himself for his brothers. And that's Judges 9. So let's pray. God, we thank you for this day. We thank you for your word that we're able to look in and get these, just learn from your word and see examples of people who either do things wrong or do things right, but either way we can learn from it, God. And we thank you that you've preserved these narratives in your word, and we just pray that you would help us to want to sow after things that are going to be good, sow after things that are going to be righteous, so that we can reap things that would be good for us and reap things that would be righteous things and things that are going to bring us closer to you as opposed to sowing after our flesh. And we pray that you would just help us not to be like Abimelech, but to be a leader like you were, not like he was, and help us to not make the same mistakes as people in the past have made, but instead that we would follow after you. I pray you to just be with the rest of these services here and going around this building. If there's anyone here who doesn't know you as their Savior, we pray that they would want to learn